Imagine orchestrating what you believe is the perfect high-stakes abduction. You bypass security protocols to target the family member of a prominent national television journalist. You carefully draft encrypted emails demanding massive sums of untraceable cryptocurrency. You send these threats directly to media outlets knowing they will generate instant global panic. It looks like a sophisticated operation, but then you make two catastrophic forensic errors that immediately expose the entire operation as a fraud to federal investigators. First, you leave a substantial amount of the victim blood right at the primary entry point of the residence. Second, and far more damaging to your extortion plot, you fail to provide a single shred of proof of life. In the dark economy of ransom kidnappings, proof of life is the absolute foundation of the transaction. Without it, the demands are completely worthless. This glaring contradiction is the exact moment the behavioral analysis unit of the FBI stops looking at this as a standard hostage negotiation. They look at the blood, they look at the digital demands, and they realize the entire ransom narrative is nothing but smoke and mirrors. It is a massive decoy carefully designed to misdirect law enforcement and the public. What happens when investigators realize the primary motive is a complete fabrication intended to hide a much darker reality? Why would a perpetrator go through the immense trouble of staging a nationwide extortion plot if the true goal was never financial gain? The answers are hidden inside a rapidly closing window of time. A terrifying forensic gap of just under 4 hours that completely rewrites the reality of this investigation. Welcome to Crime Files with Liam, where we bypass the internet speculation and focus strictly on the verified forensic timeline. If you are fascinated by the meticulous unraveling of complex behavioral evidence, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now. We are about to tear apart this staged crime scene and expose the absolute truth hiding beneath the lies. The contrast between the digital sophistication of a cryptocurrency demand and the chaotic biological reality of a bloody crime scene is jarring. It tells investigators that the person sending the emails might not be the same person who stood on that porch. Or worse, it means the violence was the actual objective, and the money was just an afterthought. The target of this elaborate misdirection was not a corporate executive or a rival criminal. The target was an 84-year-old woman living a remarkably quiet and private life. Nancy Guthrie was the mother of a famous news anchor, but she did not live a life of glamour or intense public scrutiny. She resided in a peaceful neighborhood far removed from the glaring lights of a television studio. Her daily routine was predictable and deeply grounded in necessity. She battled significant medical hurdles, including high blood pressure and a serious cardiac condition. She relied completely on a pacemaker to keep her heart beating steadily. This medical reality is the critical anomaly that makes the events that followed so perplexing. When you suffer from severe cardiovascular issues and depend on a pacemaker, time is not just a concept. Time is a strict biological ticking clock. Any deviation from her medication schedule could trigger a fatal medical event. You do not simply disappear voluntarily without your life-sustaining prescriptions. This extreme biological vulnerability is exactly why law enforcement sources allege that the perpetrator had been scouting the residence for several weeks prior to the attack. This was not a random crime of opportunity. The alleged surveillance indicates a predator patiently studying the patterns of an elderly woman who could not possibly defend herself or flee. They watched the house. They learned the schedules of anyone who came and went. They understood the layout of the property and the precise moments of absolute isolation. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, the rhythm of that quiet life proceeded exactly as expected. She had enjoyed a normal dinner with her family. At exactly 9:48 p.m., her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drove her back to her residence. He pulled up to the house and ensured she made it inside safely. The timeline here is meticulously documented by local authorities, and it leaves zero room for ambiguity. He did not linger or notice anything out of the ordinary in the surrounding shadows. The neighborhood was quiet. At 9:50 p.m., the heavy mechanism of the garage door engaged. It rumbled down and sealed the 84-year-old woman inside her home. The mechanical thud of the door hitting the concrete floor was the final verified interaction she had with the outside world. The engine of her son-in-law vehicle faded down the street, leaving the property in complete silence. There were no screams. There were no signs of forced entry at that specific moment. There was only the quiet hum of a suburban street in the dead of winter, a perfectly normal evening frozen in time just seconds before the perimeter was breached. The sheer ordinary nature of that drop-off is what makes the subsequent forensic evidence so deeply chilling. A woman completely dependent on cardiac medication was now alone in a house that had allegedly been mapped and studied by an unseen threat. The locked doors and the drawn blinds offered an illusion of security that was about to be violently shattered. As the clock ticked past 10 p.m., the house sat motionless in the dark. The silence was heavy and undisturbed, but the timeline of a predator had already been activated. The isolation was absolute. She was entirely separated from her family and cut off from any immediate rescue. The investigation hinges entirely on a terrifying chronological void. Investigators call it the blackout window. It is a strictly defined period stretching precisely from the moment the garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. to the moment the digital eyes of the house were blinded. For nearly 4 agonizing hours, the official record is completely blank. What happened inside that house during those 237 minutes remains the most heavily guarded secret of the investigation, but we do know exactly how that blackout window ended. At exactly 1:47 a.m. on the morning of February 1st, the motion sensors on the front porch security system were triggered. The camera jolted to life and captured a chilling sequence of events that law enforcement has meticulously analyzed frame by frame. An individual emerged from the darkness and stepped directly onto the porch. They were heavily concealed, wearing a mask that obscured all facial features. Their hands were covered by thick gloves, ensuring no latent prints would be left on the hardware or the door frames. They wore a backpack, suggesting they came equipped with specific tools or intended to remove specific items from the residence. This was not a frantic burglar looking for quick cash. The physical language of the suspect was deliberate and cold. They did not attempt to smash the camera or display any erratic behavior. Instead, they reached up with calculated precision and deliberately severed the connection to the device. The feed went dead. The methodical nature of this act completely reshapes the profile of the intruder. Disabling a security system requires prior knowledge of camera placement and an understanding of the technical vulnerabilities of the cost device. It proves the suspect was fully aware of the digital surveillance and took immediate surgical steps to blind the investigation. But the timeline introduces a massive logical fracture. If the perpetrator had allegedly been stalking the house for weeks, why wait until nearly 2 a.m. to strike? And more importantly, why disconnect the exterior camera only after spending potentially hours on the property? Or why approach the front door so brazenly if the initial breach happened elsewhere? The delayed blinding of the cameras suggests the intruder might have already been inside the house and was leaving, or perhaps this was a secondary entry attempt by an accomplice. The blackout window creates a paralyzing puzzle for the detectives assigned to the case. Every single second between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m. must be reconstructed using nothing but trace evidence and behavioral assumptions. They have to ask if the victim was asleep when the perimeter was breached, or if she confronted the masked figure in the dark hallways of her own home. The precision of the camera disconnection tells investigators they are hunting a disciplined adversary, someone who understands the absolute necessity of digital darkness. But even the most disciplined predators make mistakes when adrenaline floods their system. The masked individual managed to blind the digital eye of the house, but they failed to anticipate the biological evidence they would leave behind in the immediate aftermath. By severing the connection, the suspect believed they had erased their presence from the timeline. They thought the darkness would protect them. But the very act of reaching for that lens set off a chain reaction of forensic discoveries. What exactly was happening on that porch just outside the frame of the dead camera? And what horrifying truth was waiting to be discovered just inches away from the disconnected wires? The disconnection was not an act of vandalism. It was a tactical maneuver, executed to cover an escape or to hide the staging of a complex crime scene. The suspect manipulated the environment to dictate exactly what law enforcement would and would not see. But this desperate attempt at concealment only highlighted the extreme severity of the situation. The dead camera feed is a loud digital scream that something catastrophic had just occurred. When authorities finally arrived to secure the residence, they were confronted with a crime scene that immediately shattered any theory of a peaceful disappearance. The visual reality of the front entryway directly contradicted the digital narrative being pushed to the media. Right at the threshold of the home, investigators discovered a significant presence of biological evidence. It was blood. And laboratory testing quickly and conclusively confirmed that the DNA profile matched the homeowner 100%. The discovery of this specific biological material violently alters the trajectory of the entire case. Kidnapping for ransom is inherently a business transaction. The commodity is the safe return of a living human being. A professional abduction team knows that injuring an elderly hostage, especially one with severe cardiovascular issues, is exceptionally bad for business. You need the victim alive to collect the payout. The presence of blood at the primary entry point indicates a chaotic physical struggle. It points to a violent loss of control that directly contradicts the careful planning required to disable security cameras and orchestrate a digital extortion campaign. But the physical evidence inside the house presented an even more terrifying reality. As forensic teams processed the interior, they found the environment to be deeply concerning. The absolute most critical discovery was the medication. The highly specific life-saving prescriptions required to maintain her pacemaker and regulate her blood pressure were abandoned at the scene. Along with these essential medications, other vital personal belongings were left entirely untouched. This is the ultimate red flag for the behavioral analysis unit. An elderly victim completely dependent on cardiac medication does not pack a bag and walk away without the very pills that keep her heart beating. And a sophisticated ransom crew taking a high-value target would absolutely secure those medications to ensure their hostage remains alive long enough to facilitate the monetary exchange. The abandoned medication and the biological evidence at the entryway create an insurmountable logical paradox. You cannot have a highly coordinated cryptocurrency extortion plot while simultaneously leaving a chaotic, violent crime scene devoid of the necessary tools to keep the victim alive. The pieces simply do not fit together. This is the terrifying realization that sweeps through the incident command center. This is not a hostage situation. This is a crime scene that has been intentionally staged to look like something else entirely. The realization is absolutely chilling. The blood tells a story of sudden violence. The abandoned medication tells a story of extreme physical distress and a rapid, unplanned exit. So, who in the world is sending those emails demanding millions of dollars? If the physical evidence proves a ransom operation is completely illogical, then the entire digital demand is a massive engineered decoy. It is a psychological weapon deployed to force the authorities to chase ghosts in cyberspace, while the real physical evidence degrades. Drop your theories in the comments below right now. Tell us what you think is hiding in that missing window between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m. How does a masked suspect orchestrate a violent abduction but forget the medication required to make the ransom viable? The answers are deeply unsettling. The contradiction is so severe that it forces investigators to completely discard their standard operational playbooks. They are no longer negotiating with kidnappers. They are hunting a phantom who is using the media as a megaphone to broadcast a completely fabricated reality. The blood on the porch is the only piece of honest communication the suspect left behind. It screams that the victim suffered a traumatic physical event before crossing the threshold of that house for the last time. Every single detail of the extortion demands is poisoned by the existence of that biological material. The massive decoy is beginning to fracture under the weight of basic forensic logic. The stage scene is a desperate attempt to buy time, but forensic science does not care about encrypted emails. It only cares about the physical truth left behind in the dirt and the DNA. With the realization that the ransom demands are a carefully constructed illusion, the investigation pivots aggressively toward physical trace evidence. If the emails are a lie, then the truth must be found in the geographic footprint of the escape route. Investigators begin expanding their search grid outward from the deeply concerning interior of the house. They are looking for any physical anomaly discarded in the frantic hours following the incident. And according to an independent investigative report from Drop Dead Serious, a massive forensic breakthrough occurs just a short distance from the primary crime scene. Search teams combing the surrounding area reportedly discover a single discarded glove located exactly 2 miles away from the residence. The physical characteristics of this glove are immediately recognized by the detectives reviewing the case files. It is reportedly a direct visual match to the thick hand coverings worn by the masked individual captured on the Ring camera at 1:47 a.m. This single piece of discarded fabric is an absolute goldmine for the forensic laboratory. When a perpetrator attempts to conceal their identity using gloves, they are creating a humid microclimate against their own skin. Over the course of a stressful and highly physical event, like a home invasion or an abduction, sweat and microscopic skin cells are continuously shed and trapped within the lining of the material. When the crime laboratory processes the interior of the recovered glove, they discover exactly what they are looking for. The fabric contains a distinct profile of unidentified male DNA. This biological signature instantly becomes the most critical piece of evidence in the entire investigation. It is a microscopic tether linking the violent crime scene directly to the person wearing the mask. But the location of the discarded glove introduces a complex behavioral puzzle for the criminal profilers. 2 miles is an incredibly specific distance. It is far enough away to suggest the suspect was actively fleeing the immediate perimeter using a vehicle, but it is surprisingly close enough to indicate a sudden spike in panic or a disruption in their escape plan. Why would a predator who was disciplined enough to methodically sever a camera connection suddenly become sloppy enough to toss a primary piece of physical evidence out of a window just minutes away from the target location? Did the suspect realize the glove was contaminated with the victim blood and attempt to purge the evidence in a moment of sheer terror? Or was the glove accidentally dropped during a frantic transfer between two different getaway vehicles? The presence of the DNA proves the suspect is male, but it also proves he is fallible. The carefully constructed facade of the brilliant criminal mastermind who planned weeks of surveillance and orchestrated a complex digital decoy is rapidly collapsing. A true professional does not leave a perfectly preserved genetic profile sitting on the side of the road 2 miles from the extraction point. This mistake allows law enforcement to begin mapping a definitive direction of travel. They can now canvass surveillance cameras along that specific 2-mile corridor, looking for a vehicle matching the exact timeline of the blackout window. Every traffic light camera and every commercial security feed along that precise route is subpoenaed and heavily scrutinized. The investigation transforms from a digital manhunt into a grueling physical forensic tracking operation. They are no longer chasing anonymous cryptocurrency wallets. They are hunting a specific male profile with a known geographic starting point and a verified direction of travel. The entire resources of the law enforcement apparatus are intensely focused on matching that unidentified male DNA to a name and a face. The net is closing in on the physical perpetrator. The physical evidence is finally speaking louder than the digital lies. But just as the forensic teams prepare to run the genetic sequence through the national database, the entire investigation is suddenly violently derailed by a massive external complication. While the detectives are hyper-focused on the male DNA and the 2-mile escape route, the digital decoy they thought they had ignored suddenly explodes across the national media landscape in a highly coordinated and overwhelming offensive. The sheer volume of the incoming digital noise threatens to completely drown out the fragile physical clues. Just when the laboratory technicians believe they have cornered the physical truth, the architect of the digital illusion strikes back with an unprecedented wave of public manipulation. The suspect is actively weaponizing the media to disrupt the chain of custody, while detectives scramble to trace the physical trajectory of the suspect who vanished into the freezing night. A completely separate and highly orchestrated digital offensive begins bombarding the inboxes of major national news syndicates. The timing of these communications is surgically precise. Before the local authorities can even establish a solid perimeter or fully process the biological material left at the residential threshold, the narrative is violently hijacked by a series of electronic demands. These are not handwritten letters mailed to the family, they are encrypted emails blasted directly to the press. The author of these messages claims full responsibility for the disappearance and outlines a highly specific set of conditions for the safe return of the high-profile hostage. The primary demand is an astronomical sum of decentralized digital currency. By demanding cryptocurrency, the sender is exploiting the borderless and inherently anonymous nature of the blockchain. It is a sophisticated method of extortion that immediately forces the Federal Bureau of Investigation to deploy their elite cybercrime division. Tracking these decentralized wallets requires navigating a labyrinth of international servers and encrypted networks. But the behavioral analysis unit immediately detects a catastrophic flaw in the structure of these digital demands. When profilers dissect the language and the strategy behind the emails, they find a glaring psychological inconsistency that completely derails the traditional hostage negotiation playbook. The emails are entirely devoid of any verifiable proof of life. In the grim reality of high-stakes abductions, a photograph, a voice recording, or the answer to a highly specific personal question is the absolute minimum requirement to initiate a transaction. A professional kidnapping syndicate understands that establishing the physical well-being of the asset is the only way to guarantee a payout. You do not demand millions of dollars in untraceable funds without proving you actually hold the leverage. The complete absence of this vital verification immediately signals to the seasoned profilers that the digital author is operating from a position of profound weakness rather than strength. The strategic choice of the target audience also raises massive red flags inside the federal command center. Extortionists typically open a private channel of communication directly with the family or a designated corporate representative to ensure a swift and discreet transfer of assets. Blasting the demands to national television networks is a chaotic maneuver that guarantees maximum public panic and invites the immediate scrutiny of the entire federal law enforcement apparatus. It is an incredibly reckless strategy for a professional criminal attempting to execute a clean financial extraction. This leads the profiling team to a chilling hypothesis. They begin to suspect that they are not looking at a unified criminal enterprise. Instead, they are staring at two completely separate and highly destructive forces colliding in real time. Do you think the individual who physically breached the residential perimeter and the architect writing these encrypted emails are the exact same person, or are we witnessing two entirely different predators operating simultaneously? Let us know your theory in the comments section below. The federal investigators must now bifurcate their resources. One team is painstakingly hunting a physical ghost down a 2-mile stretch of asphalt, while another team is chasing a digital phantom across the global internet. The pressure from the national media is compounding by the hour. Anchors are reading the ransom demands live on air, creating a feedback loop of hysteria that threatens to completely compromise the integrity of the physical investigation. The author of the emails is successfully weaponizing the news cycle to control the narrative. They are forcing the federal government to respond to their digital provocations, while the actual biological reality of the crime scene remains a heavily guarded secret. Every hour spent analyzing the cryptocurrency wallets is an hour stolen from the physical manhunt. The digital decoy is functioning exactly as intended. It is a massive smokescreen designed to overwhelm the system and exhaust investigative resources. But the behavioral analysts refuse to take the bait blindly. They know that the structure of a lie often reveals the truth about the liar. The syntax of the emails, the specific terminology used to describe the digital wallets, and the aggressive tone of the threats are all being fed into advanced linguistic databases. The federal agents are looking for any digital fingerprint or linguistic anomaly that might expose the true identity of the author. The tension inside the command center is suffocating. They are fully aware that if the digital demands are a complete fabrication, then the physical reality of what actually happened at that house is far more sinister than a simple monetary dispute. The emails are a distraction from a much darker objective. The behavioral unit is waiting for the digital author to make a single arrogant mistake. And in the high stakes game of cyber extortion, arrogance is always the ultimate vulnerability. The break in the digital investigation arrives with the force of a sledgehammer, completely shattering the public understanding of the crisis. On February 5th, 2026, the Federal Bureau of Investigation convenes a highly anticipated emergency press conference. The media presence is overwhelming, with satellite trucks surrounding the local field office and national networks cutting into standard programming to broadcast the update live. The public is bracing for a tragic confirmation or a tense update on the cryptocurrency negotiations. Instead, the special agent in charge steps up to the podium and delivers a revelation that completely rewrites the entire landscape of the investigation. The Bureau announces that they have successfully tracked the encrypted communications and executed a coordinated raid resulting in a federal arrest. But the individual sitting in the interrogation room is not a sophisticated international kidnapper or a violent cartel enforcer. The suspect in custody is identified as a completely unaffiliated imposter. They are an opportunistic extortionist who watched the initial breaking news reports and decided to exploit the tragedy for personal financial gain. This individual possessed absolutely zero connection to the physical crime scene, the victim, or the isolated suburban neighborhood. They simply saw a high-profile target, a media frenzy, and an opportunity to inject themselves into the narrative using the anonymous shield of the internet. The revelation is a staggering psychological blow to the public, but for the behavioral analysis unit, it is the exact confirmation they had been anticipating. The entire narrative of a targeted kidnapping for ransom is officially dead. The demands for decentralized currency, the threats broadcast to the news syndicates, and the terrifying emails were nothing but an opportunistic mirage. This individual was a cyber scavenger, feeding off the residual panic of a genuine physical tragedy. If you did not see that massive digital twist coming, make sure to hit that like button right now. With the imposter sitting in a federal holding cell, the massive digital smokescreen finally dissipates. But the clarity it brings is absolutely terrifying. The federal agents are suddenly thrust, right, back to square one, but the reality they now face is infinitely darker than a hostage negotiation. If the entire financial motive was a complete fabrication generated by a stranger, then the actual predator who breached the perimeter on the night of January 31st had an entirely different objective. The crime was never about extracting wealth from a prominent journalistic family. The absence of a ransom demand means the violence was the primary goal. The horrific realization settles over the command center like a suffocating blanket. The unknown subject who meticulously severed the security camera and left a trail of biological chaos at the threshold was executing a highly personal and specifically targeted act of aggression. The fake ransom emails had successfully stalled the public narrative for 5 crucial days, but they had not stopped the physical forensic work. The detectives now know with absolute certainty that they are hunting a phantom who operates without the play's logical constraints of a financial transaction. Kidnappers want money and therefore want their victims alive. A predator with a different motive has no such boundaries. The psychological profile of the suspect undergoes an immediate and drastic revision. The investigators are no longer looking for a rational criminal enterprise. They are hunting someone driven by a deeply ingrained psychological compulsion, an extreme personal grievance, or a completely irrational fixation. The removal of the financial motive transforms the profile from a calculated extortionist into a highly volatile and unpredictable threat. The stakes are suddenly elevated from a complex recovery mission to a desperate homicide investigation. The imposter behind the keyboard is facing severe federal charges for wire fraud and extortion, but their most devastating crime was stealing invaluable time from the investigators. 5 days of national attention were squandered chasing a digital ghost while the physical trail of the actual perpetrator grew colder by the hour. The press conference abruptly concludes, leaving the reporters stunned and the public reeling from the whiplash of the deceptive narrative. The Federal Bureau of Investigation retreats behind closed doors, immediately locking down all further channels of communication. They have exposed the lie, but they are now left staring into a terrifying abyss of unknown motives. The real monster is still out there, completely unburdened by the digital chaos they inadvertently inspired. The investigation is stripped down to its bare and brutal essence. There are no more emails to trace and no more cryptocurrency wallets to monitor. There is only the silent house, the shattered timeline, and the horrific biological truth waiting to be fully understood. Following the explosive revelation of the imposter arrest, the Federal Bureau of Investigation executes a drastic tactical pivot. They completely sever all meaningful communication with the press and the public. This sudden transition from highly visible press conferences to an impenetrable wall of silence is a highly calculated maneuver known in intelligence circles as the cloak and dagger approach. The local authorities stop issuing daily briefings. The command center stops answering inquiries from the national syndicates. The entire law enforcement apparatus essentially vanishes into the shadows. This absolute silence is not a sign of defeat or confusion. It is an aggressive psychological weapon deployed specifically to manipulate the actual perpetrator. A former federal agent specializing in behavioral analysis publicly noted that this extreme level of operational secrecy indicates a fundamental shift in the primary objective of the task force. The authorities are no longer acting as though they are actively searching for a living hostage. When investigators believe a victim is still alive and capable of being rescued, they typically utilize the media to apply public pressure or to solicit highly specific tips from the community. They release descriptions of vehicles or grainy surveillance images in the hopes of jarring a memory, but when the Bureau goes completely dark, it signals a grim acceptance of the forensic reality. They are not looking for a rescue opportunity, they are methodically building an airtight prosecutorial trap. By starving the media of new information, the investigators are deliberately depriving the unknown subject of the very oxygen they need to gauge the progress of the manhunt. The predator who committed the physical act is now completely blind to the direction of the investigation. They do not know what physical trace elements have been recovered from the residential threshold. They do not know if neighborhood surveillance captured their escape route. And most importantly, they do not know how close the net is drawing around them. This information vacuum is designed to induce a state of extreme paranoia and psychological instability in the suspect. The investigators want the perpetrator to feel isolated and panicked. They want them to constantly wonder if the silence means the authorities are totally lost or if it means a tactical strike team is already assembling outside their front door. Panicked suspects make critical logistical errors. They revisit crime scenes, they attempt to contact witnesses, or they try to unexpectedly liquidate assets and flee the jurisdiction. The silence is a meticulously laid snare, waiting for the target to make a single erratic movement. But this strategy also demands an immense emotional toll from the family and the public who are left agonizing in the void of information. The transition from a chaotic ransom narrative to a silent hunt leaves a massive, unresolved question hanging heavily over the entire case. If the driving force behind this violent intrusion was absolutely never about financial extraction, then what was the underlying catalyst for the attack? We have a highly organized individual who conducted extensive surveillance, manipulated security hardware, and executed a physical breach with alarming precision. Yet they walked away without demanding a single cent from a family capable of paying millions. This level of extreme risk without a clear financial reward points to a deeply personal or highly specific psychological motive. Was this an act of targeted retaliation against the prominent journalist disguised as an attack on her mother? Was it an obsession fueled by a warped perception of the family? Or did the intruder simply select the house based on a specific vulnerability, completely unaware of the massive media storm their actions would unleash? The federal agents sitting in the silent command center are no longer asking how much money the suspect wanted. They are asking a much more terrifying question. What could possibly drive a human being to orchestrate such an elaborate and violent nightmare if the only true objective was cruelty itself? The answer to that horrifying question remains the final missing piece of a deeply disturbing puzzle that investigators are determined to solve. What this case teaches us about the intersection of physical violence and digital exploitation is profoundly disturbing. From An analytical perspective, the rapid emergence of the imposter highlights a terrifying evolution in modern criminal behavior. We are witnessing the industrialization of opportunistic extortion. Cyber scammers constantly monitor breaking news alerts, specifically searching for vulnerable families thrust into sudden high-profile tragedies. When a crisis occurs, these digital predators immediately inject themselves into the chaos using anonymous networks to fabricate ransom demands and extract wealth from desperate relatives. This behavior creates a massive secondary layer of victimization. It forces law enforcement agencies to divert highly specialized cyber units and hundreds of investigative hours away from the actual physical crime scene to chase completely fabricated digital ghosts. The most critical forensic takeaway from this deeply unsettling scenario is recognizing the structural anatomy of a staged digital kidnapping. As the behavioral analysis unit demonstrated, the absolute most reliable indicator of a fraudulent extortion attempt is the complete absence of a verifiable proof of life. A legitimate threat actor holding a valuable human asset will always provide evidence of their leverage to ensure a swift financial transaction. When demands for decentralized currency arrive without photographic or auditory confirmation, investigators must immediately consider the high probability of a decoy operation. This case forces us to critically evaluate the dark side of our interconnected digital age, where the anonymity of the internet allows malicious actors to weaponize human suffering from thousands of miles away. It underscores the vital necessity for the public and the media to exercise extreme caution and critical thinking when devastating events unfold in real time, ensuring that digital noise does not completely obscure the strict physical facts of a violent reality. The staggering demand for millions in cryptocurrency turned out to be nothing more than a cruel digital mirage. The anonymous emails, the threats to the media, and the international cyber hunt were all part of a massive, fabricated illusion that temporarily blinded the world. But the physical reality left behind at that quiet suburban residence cannot be erased or dismissed as a digital hoax. The biological material stained into the front entryway remains an absolute and terrifying truth. And most importantly, the microscopic, cellular profile meticulously extracted from the interior lining of that single discarded glove is a verified scientific fact. That genetic signature is the ultimate, undeniable tether linking a violent physical predator to this horrific event. The massive decoy has been completely dismantled, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation is now zeroing in on the only piece of evidence that truly matters. The entire trajectory of this complex investigation now rests entirely on a microscopic sequence of human biology. So, whose genetic sequence is currently sitting inside the federal laboratory waiting to be matched? Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications right now, so you do not miss the definitive update when that result is finally revealed.